Hello and welcome back to the Timothy McGrew channel. I'm going to be talking about arguments from silence in history and specifically in biblical studies for the next couple of weeks. I already have a video out there you might want to watch or listen to the podcast version called Arguments from Silence, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I've been meaning to get back to this topic for a while now because I want to address some comments that were made back in the winter. I believe it was in December. At that time, Eric of Testify channel did a video rejecting a skeptical argument against the virgin birth based upon the silence of Mark. And the argument was, apparently supposed to be not just, hey, this is a miracle, it couldn't happen, but, well, it's not found in Mark, and it would be found in Mark if it really happened, and so it's really unlikely that the virgin birth happened because of the silence of Mark. In responding to that, Eric made reference to a paper by my husband, Tim McGrew, on Arguments from Silence, a professional paper. I'll link in the show notes to a preprint version of that that's available for free. On what's the problem with arguments from silence in history and why they're weak. Part of the issue is that they resemble arguments from silence that we can see are the bad kind. So, it's not that there cannot be a good argument from silence, but when these are used against other evidence, that kind of shows how much force is being given to them. When you put a big question mark over an assertion just because of someone else's silence, then you must be giving that other person's silence a lot of weight. So, a pair of analogies that Tim sometimes gives, and I believe I gave this in the earlier video, are to an argument from not seeming to perceive a spider as opposed to an argument from not seeming to perceive a tiger or a dragon. So if I say I do not seem to see a spider anywhere here around, but, how does that make me think about whether there's a spider? What if I infer probably there is no spider in the room, anywhere in the room, because I would see it if it weren't here. If it were here. So I'm giving a lot of weight to my failing to see the absence of my apparent experience of a spider, to the point where I actually have a high probability, as we call a posterior probability, that there is no spider anywhere here in the room just because I don't seem to see one. That's really jumping the gun. But if, on the other hand, I say it's a really good evidence that there is no tiger in this room, and we're not talking about some sort of supernatural tiger that's this big, we're talking about a normal-sized tiger, that, I don't seem to see a tiger in this room, that's much stronger because tigers are large and spiders are small. Okay, so spider versus tiger. Now, it might seem that this is sort of counterintuitive, and here's why. If I do seem to see a spider on the desk there, and I seem to be awake, and it's like a clear, apparent image, and it's even moving, it's not just some sort of little fuzzy, bit of yarn or something, and I see the legs, and it's like, okay, that seems like really good evidence that there is a spider in the room. And you might think, well, how can that be good evidence that there is a spider in the room, but your failure to see a spider is not good evidence that there's not a spider in the room? This room is filled with bookshelves, and there's a printer over here, and the carpet's a dark color. I could easily just fail to see a spider. There could be many spiders in this room. I'm not even going to think about that. Okay, but why? Okay, isn't this a little odd? Isn't this counterintuitive? You might think, don't some of those numbers have to add up to 1 or something? So I'm going to do a little illustrative math here to explain why that's actually okay. So the word assertion here is supposed to be like my seeming to see the spider. All right. So this up here is the argument from my seeming to see a spider that there is a spider. Okay, so both of these numbers, you'll notice, are low. All right, and it's very important to realize these numbers don't have to add to 1. So this is probability of E given H. This is probability of E given not H. Those don't have to sum to 1. So that's why they can both be low. All right, or both be high. They can sum to more than 1. They can sum to less than 1. Okay, so here's my probability that I would see a spider if there were a spider in the room. It's kind of low because of those reasons that I gave. It's only 0.02. This is just illustrative. But down here, the probability that I would have that kind of image, apparently clear image under those kind of circumstances, if there were not a spider in the room, is much, much lower. So this is actually what we call a Bayes factor of 10 to the second, pretty good Bayes factor. And over here, we're making a comparison to a document or a witness that has some credibility for what he asserts. So the assertion of the proposition that H has occurred given H is much, much greater than the assertion that H occurred given that not H, even if those are both low in absolute terms. So there's your argument for the spider, given that you seem to see the spider, or your argument for the event, given that this source tells about the event. But now let's flip this, and what we want to do is put our larger number on the top, because that's good. So here we can see that now we're going to try to make the argument from silence. Now, so I'm putting no assertion given not H on top here, because I want to put the larger number on top in both cases. It just makes it easier to envisage. So that has to sum to 1 with this. Assertion, no assertion. Those have to sum to 1. Assertion given not H, no assertion given not H. So if this is 0.0002, then this is 0.9998. And the same here. Assertion given H, no assertion given H, 0.02 plus 0.98, those sum to 1, right? But look at this. It's almost no evidence at all. It equals approximately a Bayes factor, as we call it, a measure of evidential force of 1.02. And 1 would be absolutely equal, like to where it's of no evidential value at all. A Bayes factor of 1 is a wash, okay? And here it's like really close to 1. It's just barely over 1. So my failure to see or seem to see the spider is barely any evidence at all worth speaking of that there is no spider in the room. All right, so I think that's pretty illustrative. And the same could be true if there's no assertion in the text given that a certain thing happened over no assertion in the text given that thing happened. No assertion given that it didn't happen over no assertion given that it happened. It's barely any evidence at all that it didn't happen because they're both low. The probability of the positive assertion can be quite low, and the probability of the simple absence of that assertion, can be quite high. Okay, and what this illustrates is no assertion that H is not the same thing as assertion to the contrary. No assertion that H can include an assertion to the contrary. Obviously, if somebody says, no, H definitely didn't happen, all right, that's an assertion to the contrary, but he may just make no statement about H at all. He may just be completely silent, and those are both included in these. So we should not treat no seeing the spider as in some sense seeing that there is no spider. Those are not the same thing. That's what we call a scope shift, okay? So I hope this hasn't been too techy, but it kind of illustrates why this is an important point, and why an argument from silence can be really weak even while an argument from assertion can be strong. So if Mark did assert the virgin birth, that could be strong evidence that the virgin birth occurred, even though Mark's simply not mentioning one way or another about the virgin birth is not strong evidence that the virgin birth did not occur. Okay. Now, after Eric posted this video back in the winter, a philosopher named Dustin Crummett was pretty critical of that Testify video. And I've been waiting for a while to kind of get back to his remarks. Crummett said that the McGrew response to the argument from silence in biblical studies is just cherry-picking some cases where arguments from silence are wrong or would be wrong, and then declaring that the entire argument is wrong. So he likened this to my concluding that my senses are completely unreliable across the board, given that occasionally I have been mistaken, or that people have been mistaken in their use of their senses. He also made this comparison. You're in touch with your brother, you're on good terms with your brother, and your brother doesn't tell you that he won the lottery. And Crummett said, look, I know my brother. I can be quite confident that if he did win the lottery, he would tell me that. So there you go. There's a good argument from silence. So you can't just erase it altogether. Now, I want to go with these two things in these videos that I'm doing here and show why these are poor analogies for the argument from silence, specifically against testimony, as it is so often used in biblical studies, and as in fact it was being used in the case of the virgin birth, to which Testify was responding. So nobody's saying that I'm just going to, out of nowhere, believe that Jesus was born of a virgin, even though I don't have any document that says it. I don't have any evidence at all. I'm just sort of sitting around in my armchair. Of course not. It's a very specific proposition. You need evidence, and not even for a miracle. This is true of other things. I'm not going to believe that, and I shouldn't believe that, a man is walking by my house right this very minute, walking a collie dog named Rex, when, I just made that up, right? I have no evidence for it. You can call that an argument from silence if you want, just the argument from the absence of evidence, but it's very, very defeasible. Okay? And all it's saying is, don't believe something with no evidence for it. But if I happen to be out there and I meet some guy walking down the street and he introduces me to his collie and says his collie's name is Rex, then, that's fine. That's, there you go. Or if someone else tells me that happened while I was standing here. All right, so it's defeasible. But what we're critiquing here are arguments from silence against the documents that we have. So, for example, I won't only use the virgin birth. What about the slaughter of the innocents? You'll often hear skeptics saying, hey, if Herod had really killed all those boy babies in Bethlehem, Josephus would have said something. So the silence of Josephus is set against the assertion of Matthew, and that's not even a miraculous occurrence. All right. Now, let's think about this with respect to your brother winning the lottery. Let's suppose that your brother doesn't mention to you. Let's suppose you are in touch with your brother. You're on good terms with him. And you speak to him with some regularity, hear from him with some regularity. And he doesn't mention that he won the lottery. And you think that he would mention it to you if he did win the lottery. But now let's suppose that your sister tells you that your brother won the lottery. And you're also on good terms with your sister. Okay? And you have reason to trust her. Okay? Just like you have reason to trust your brother. She seems to be serious. She doesn't seem to be pulling a hoax or pulling your leg or anything like that. You might be puzzled, right? You might say, man, I was on the phone with him 2 days ago. Why didn't he tell me? You say he told you a week ago? Dude, you go to your brother. Why didn't you tell me you won the lottery, right? So you may be really surprised and really puzzled, but you correct your assumption. You should be willing to correct your assumption that your brother would have been the first to tell you if he won the lottery. So even in that case, the argument from silence against testimony would not be good. I mean, for you to just go, I think my sister's just wrong, or I've got this huge question mark, but your sister's careful. Your sister doesn't seem to, misunderstand things. She gives you a very circumstantial account of her conversation with your brother, and it's like, I don't see how she could just be mistaken. She doesn't lie, so, and so you really ought to shift your probability that your brother won the lottery there, even aside from anything else. Okay, and I'm going to talk about a lot of disanalogies here, but even there, in that strongest case, it needs to be defeasible by testimony. All right, now another point that we need to make is that the usage in biblical studies usually concerns some particular author and a particular set of documents, or in the case of the Gospel of Mark that we were talking about here, just a single document. So we're going to have to narrow this time period. It's not like you're following, your brother around for many, many years and he never tells you that he won the lottery, okay? But rather that during this specific time period, he would have told you that he won the lottery. That makes it more analogous to whether we would find a statement in this one historical document. No, nobody's saying here, like, I personally know Mark, or the author of the Gospel of Mark, and I got up every day for a period of 30 years and went and spent hours and hours and hours with Mark talking about Jesus and everything. Tell me everything you know about Jesus, and he never once mentioned the virgin birth. If he knew about it, which is another question, that would be somewhat stronger, as an argument from silence at least. But all we have is this one document from Mark. So this is like you saying, man, I was just on the phone with my brother the other day. I would expect that he would have told me then. And that's more defeasible than if you just had all of these many, many opportunities and he didn't at that time. Okay, also notice that in the case of some of these things, the virgin birth being one, we have both Luke and Matthew mentioning it. So this would be like doubting both your sister and your dad, who tell you that your brother won the lottery. Okay, so and there's apparent independence between Matthew and Luke. At least there doesn't appear to be literary dependence, and I would argue there appears to be factual independence, because they say so many things that are not overlapping at all, different wordings and details. So notice that I've often characterized the argument from silence in history as everything has to be reported twice, but here it is reported twice. That's still not good enough. All right, so that's like, okay, how many times does this have to be reported? Or, it's got to be in just Mark specifically? Like, Mark is our only gospel that has any credibility at all. Everything's got to be in Mark? When you think about that, that's a problem, okay? It becomes problematic because we're really focusing on just this one place where we're demanding that it be found. All right, another point. Sometimes the argument from silence in history focuses on a person or a group of people who might not be as personally interested in the event. So we'll hear, why don't we have more non-Christian historians who talk about the idea that Jesus was at least considered to be a miracle worker? We want to find Roman historians that mention that. We want several of them, All right, Romans tended to have contempt for certain people groups who were sort of under their control. And the Jews in particular came in for a lot of, anti-Semitic jokes and that kind of thing. To report, there was this man, and some of the Jews, not all of them even, thought he was a miracle worker. I think we can ask how important that is going to be to a given Roman historian. It's not like we have no outside references to the existence of Jesus. We do. But that kind of thing, it was believed, like I once had somebody say, why don't we find a Roman historian who mentions that it was believed that Jesus fed the 5,000? It's like, so now it's a specific miracle, and we want the Roman historians to be sort of acting like, I don't know, daily news bloggers or something, talking about everything that happens in Galilee and recording this because this was considered to be a kind of a big event. They didn't have that attitude toward what was happening in Galilee. It was, they didn't think of it as something where they're breathlessly reporting everything that seems interesting, on a year-by-year basis. It would be sort of like doubting that your second cousin won the lottery against testimony from someone who is closer to your second cousin because your brother, who's not in regular contact with your second cousin, doesn't mention it. Okay, so the Roman historians in that case would be like, the brother, and they're not in touch with Jesus, who's like, the second cousin. They're not all that interested. Okay, but the disciples reporting that Jesus fed the 5,000, those are people like those who would be close to your second cousin. Somebody would have definite interest in mentioning remarkable things surrounding Jesus. These are just some of the disanalogies. I mean, I'm just getting started. I've got at least one more whole video about this, but I just want you to start thinking about why we can't just make these facile comparisons to ancient arguments from silence against data, against statements that are made in documents that at least purport to be from people in the know and close to the facts. And of course, I'm going to argue that we have other reasons to think that they are from people in the know and close to the facts, so that they do have that top-heavy base factor for what they report. That doesn't mean we're just saying, oh, they report a miracle wants to happen, but that the report has some force for the event. Also, again, this argument is often used against non-miraculous occurrences as well, as in the case I just gave of the slaughter of the innocents. I'll be coming back to all of these examples and more examples, more discussion of why Crummett's analogies are not really good analogies in the next presentation here at the Lydia McGrew channel, where we're making common sense rigorous.